The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, and welcome to our third in our series of 4 town halls. Today we're going to be talking about contract management and e-signatures within FileBound. I want to also remind you that our last installment of the town halls will be on December 16th, where we're going to talk about FileBound Connect. And that's one that I'm kind of excited about, and I hope you can attend with us. If you're a FileBound user, you have FileBound Connect, but you may not be using it. And so you get an idea of what that module can do for you, not only from the ability to add documents to the system, but a completely different way in which you can retrieve documents as well. I also want to remind you that our 2 previous town halls, the first on October 11th, which was on AP GL coding, and the second that was November 11th on automating your onboarding processes, are available on our YouTube channel, and there are links to it on our website as well. My name is Jack Arnston. I am one of the principals at the Priton Group, and joining me this morning is Bill Prohoda, my business partner, and JD Arnston, a senior systems engineer with the Priton Group. Our agenda for this morning, we'll start by talking about how this specific enhancement came about. So what were the things people are asking for, and what brought us to develop this. Then we're going to get under the hood from a technical perspective and take a look at how we actually designed and built it. Once we finish that, we're going to look at how it actually works for an end user to give you a chance to see what that's like. And at the end, we're going to have questions. Now, this is a town hall, and as before when we've had these, participation is key. So you have a couple different ways in which you can participate. The first is you can ask a question via the chat section of the GoToMeeting dialog, and you can see that there's an area you can type that in. You hit the send button, and I'll be monitoring those, and I will ask those at the end of the webinar. The other option is you'll also notice that there's a little hand with a red arrow pointing down. If you click on that hand, it will turn to a upward facing arrow and turn green, and that lets me know that you have a question you'd like to ask. I will be monitoring that as well, and will unmute you, introduce you, and let you ask your questions at that time. I also want to let you know that we'll be recording this session, and we will make it available to you afterwards. So if you'd like to rewatch part of it, or would like to share it with a colleague, you'll be able to do that as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill and let him get started. Bill?
Thanks, Jack. Good morning, everyone. So to start with, we're going to cover what's the big idea and then what's the big benefit. And when we start thinking about what's the big idea behind the contract management and renewal management process, our clients kept asking us, we need to find a way that we can automate this process for contract creation and for renewals. And so we sat down, we took a look at some of the things that we needed to address in order to find a way to create this solution for them. First of all, we heard that we need to find a way to automate the creation and signing of the contracts instead of having it be a manual process all the time for creation and distribution. We need to automate that. We need to try to leverage the current signing technologies, the digital signatures, because that's the wave of the future, and it's especially with the times that we've been in with the distributed work environments and the distributed relationships with our clients. We need a way to leverage those digital signing technologies to make it easier for customers or anyone signing the documents. We needed to leverage the workflow to make sure that we followed the appropriate authorization processes so that everything went according to the design and things are returned in a timely fashion and returned appropriately. And then finally, be left with the ability to create and find and identify the audit process. So we can always identify where the documents were, where they went, how they got signed, when they got signed, and have that available to us. So with the various technologies we work with this solution, we can provide that auditable process. So what are the big benefits? Well, first of all, we find that by employing these technologies and the automation, we actually create an accelerated contract distribution, as well as accelerated contract signing process, because it's easier. And if it's easier, people are going to tend to migrate toward it. and participate in it in a more timely fashion. So the ability to get the contract signed and back to you and to resolve that element, whether it's a new contract or a renewal, is actually being accelerated. We can automate now the reminders when contracts are up for renewal, or reminders when the contracts are out for signature. And so this automated process will prevent things from falling between the cracks. We always know where everything is in the process because of the way that workflow, both FileBound's workflow and the digital signing system will follow as well. And so we always know where the document is at all times, and that's important too, so things don't get lost in the cracks. And then finally, we're continuing as we strive in all of these webinars that we've been giving, and these are the things that we're seeing, is that we're able to leverage the forms in the workflow to serve all of our ongoing forms and workflow needs. Without a doubt, these two elements are key toward driving great efficiency and great outcomes for our clients. And so these are some of the great benefits that occur. So with that said, the first thing we're going to do is sort of walk you through how we configure and create the platform for leveraging the contracts management workflow and the e-signatures. And JD is going to take us through those various elements. And when he's done, then I'll be returning and we'll kind of walk you through what it looks like when it actually occurs in the actual practice of those processes. So JD, if you could take it from here and take our people through the process. Thanks.
Sure. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of walk through this process in a nutshell. So what kicks off the this whole process is that a contract is created via a template, be that in Word, Excel, or a PDF. That contract is then saved as a PDF to FileBound, and that initiates the workflow in FileBound. When that workflow is initiated, it'll take that contract and send it out via the e-sign stencil. From there, reminders can be also sent out via workflow escalations, and those can be sent out to the client, the contract owner, both, or other people involved in this process as well, such as managers and so on. The contract is then signed and returned via DocuSign integration, and when it comes back into FileBound, we can also evaluate how that document was managed in DocuSign. So if the signer rejected it, we can tell, and we can route it differently in the workflow depending on how it comes back in. And finally, once upon renewals, dates are then updated for the eventual renewal workflow, and so that includes the review date, notification date, and the expiration date. So we're going to start by looking at an overview of our initial contract workflow. So from here, we use the e-sign stencil to send out the contract for signature. We can also configure initial notification emails to be sent out from the e-sign stencil as well. We can also use a standard step to send out reminder emails. So for example, in this one, we send out a reminder if the contract hasn't been signed after 1 day, and then we send out a second reminder if it hasn't been signed after 3 days. And that time limit can be customized depending on the solution. Finally, once the document is signed, the workflow will automatically pull the signed document back into FileBound. And then we just do any additional updates that we need to do to the document or file notes and the index fields before exiting the workflow. So now we'll move over to the DocuSign side of the fence, where we'll look at building that contract template. So create a variety of templates for different types of documents that need to be signed. In this particular case, we're just going to be looking at our service contract. So in the configuration, DocuSign allows us to simply drag and drop a PDF of the contract that needs to be signed. And then we simply configure the recipients for who needs to sign the contract. In this case, we simply have one recipient, which is the customer. And we actually leave the name and the email fields blank because we dynamically fill that in from the FileBound side. So once that is done, we can simply then drag and drop our fields from the toolbar on the left-hand side of the screen onto the contract. So in this case, we've got our signature field, the date signed, the full name of the signer, and their title. Once that is all laid out, we then simply save and close, and our contract template is ready to go. So it's super quick and super easy to take care of it on that side. And there you can see we've got our service contract all ready to go. So let's take a look at the contract renewal workflow side, which takes place when it is time for a signed contract to be reviewed for renewal. So you can see here, we have this workflow broken up into 4 main parts. So we'll take a closer look at each of those and kind of pick them apart a little bit. The first step is just the initial value updates and housekeeping. In here, we start by checking the contract for any missing fields that are required, and then we also update the contract status accordingly. So once that's all taken care of, then the contract is routed to its owner, where it will then be assigned for review. That owner can either cancel it or approve it. And so once that is has been reviewed, we can then assign that contract for additional approvals. So in this case, we have a business office review, and further reviewals can be done only if certain criteria are met. So for instance, in this case, if the contract does not meet proper length or cost criteria, we can then send it over to management for approval. So finally, once all of the approvals have been met, we send that contract out for signature, much like we do with that previous smaller workflow that we showed you. And once the document is then signed, we simply do any necessary final updates again to the file or the document notes and the index fields, and then the document completes the workflow. So the last component to the contract renewal process is in the FileBound's use of scheduled workflows. So if we look at the inside of a scheduled workflow, you can see that we have the option on how to set our schedule. So we can either choose to run this workflow hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly. In this case, we're simply running our contract renewal once a week on Sunday at 8 a.m. with no end date. So once we have that all configured, we simply enable the schedule, and it is now set to run this contract renewal workflow once a week. So the next part of the configuration in here is looking at how the scheduled workflow knows to find what contracts need to be routed for review. So we set our scheduled workflow to search for in the customer contracts project, and then locate any files by evaluating the review date. So in this case, we actually use a custom variable to tell the scheduled workflow to search for any contracts with a review date of the current date, which is that $sign date, up to the current date plus 7 days forward. So now that I've kind of walked through all of the ins and outs of that, I'm going to hand it back over to Bill, and he's actually going to walk through this process in action with you.
Thanks, JD. All right, so let's take a look at the new contract workflow. This is that small, simple workflow that we showed to begin with, just to help get everyone's visual heads wrapped around the workflow and how it works. So in this case, we have our contract that's been created by the contract owner, and that contract is then sent to the e-signature stencil, which then distributes that contract out to the customer to be reviewed and then signed. And if we were to look into the workflow assignments, once that has happened, we'll be able to see that it has been sent out for signature. We're waiting on one signature to occur, which is going to come from the customer signing the document. And because of the integration with DocuSign, that integration will then, once it's signed, bring it back into into the FileBound folder and replace it. So in this case, you can see that the contract has been sent. It was awaiting signature. So then what happens when that is out and in the hands of the customer to be signed, they receive an email. And this is what the email looks like. JD had talked about how we can configure what the email body of the email is set for. In this case, we're saying, hello, you've got a contract needs to be signed. The contract number is available and the contract date is available to them. They also have the review document button. When they click the review document button, that'll take them directly to the document and they can begin the process of signing it. Now, in this case, the example that JD shared is that we dragged in the signature, signature date, the printed name of the customer's signature or the signer of the contract, and then we asked them to input their title. So when they click the signature button, they'll enter their title, and this is the result. They'll have their signature, they'll have their date, the printed name, and then their title. And that'll all appear right here in the contract. When that's done, they'll click the finish button, and that will then return the document to FileBound through the integration component within FileBound's workflow and DocuSign. And then it'll store and replace that contract from the original, which was unsigned, with the current signed contract. And the user receives a screen that says, hey, you're all done. The contract was submitted back effectively or successfully, and you're all done. At that point, they can close the window down and go about the balance of their day. But now if we look inside of FileBound, now we're going to see that the document has actually been signed, and we've been able to validate the various dates. So right now, this contract is sitting with a new review date of 10/31/2021, so approximately a year from now, because this is a yearly contract for the review date. The actual contract expiration date is January 31st of 2022, and the notification date is that date that's calculated to indicate when the document needs to be signed and back to us to be filed into the system. So if we were to take a look at this contract now from within FileBound's viewer, we're going to actually see that it has been signed and that the contract is completed and the data has been up to date. So further retrievals of this document over the course of this next year is going to reflect all of the current information as it was signed, including the signature and the date and the title. And so it's all set, ready to go. It's in force, effectively. So let's take a minute then and let's look forward now a year. Let's just say that we've gone forward a year, and this contract that was just signed is now starting to come up for renewal, as are other contracts throughout the year. So this is where the scheduled workflow comes into play. FileBound scheduled workflow can be set to kick off, as JD showed us, every week on a Sunday at 8 a.m. And it's going to use our variables, which is today's date, that's that Sunday date, and a day, 7 days forward. So it's going to look over the next week and grab all of the agreements, all the contracts that need to be reviewed in that time. And it happens to find this contract, which is what we had signed approximately a year ago. And what we do is we take a look when we do this retrieval at the review date, and the review date is actually taking the review days and it's subtracting it from the notification date, which is the date that we have to have it back in and signed in our file. And so what it does is it calculates the review date based on that, so that even though the contract expires in January, we have to have it in force, ready to go for our records by the 30th of November. And so we have to back forward or back up 30 days to give us the review date of 10/30/2021. So that then kicks off the workflow and sends it to the contract owner. Now, when the contract owner is assigned, they also receive an email. And that email identifies that it went to J.D. Arnston, who's the owner of the agreement or the contract for renewal and review. And it sent the body of the text and said, you know, we have a service contract number X for ABC Company, and we have to have it back by 11/30 because it expires 1/31 of 2022. So it gives them the information to build the context that they need. Then when JD clicks the review assignment, it'll launch the workflow, and then he'll sit down and generate a new agreement. And as you can see, this new agreement has the new date for expiration, which is a year from the review date, or the current expiration date, which right now is 1/31/2021, and it builds it for 2022. Also reflects the new contract dates. And so then when it is ready to go, it stores it into FileBound, and that kicks off the DocuSign element of the workflow, which, as you saw earlier in our original smaller workflow, it sends that DocuSign document out. And then when it comes back in, it'll do our final updates of our data. And you'll see that in a second here. So when this contract comes back in signed a second time for the renewal for this new year, you'll see that the second copy of that document is out there and is dated for 11/3 of 2021. So that's the second contract a year later. And you'll see that it is signed and dated. And if we were to scroll down the document, you'd also see the other elements that were part of this contract that went out for DocuSign. And then finally, if we were to take a look at this data and see how it's been updated, the workflow is actually taking care of that for us. If you notice, it looked at and reviewed the contract length in months, which had it updated the expiration date for 1 year from the previous expiration date. Same thing with the notification date of being 60 days back from that expiration date, and the review days are 30 days back from the notification date, which I showed you earlier is what kicks off the workflow to tell JD he's got a contract to review. But now that that contract has been reviewed and renewed and signed by the customer, it's now been updated so that the new dates are in place for the expiration date of 1/31/23, and then our review and a notification date. So that cycle now is in play and in place, and it continues to go with every new review and every new renewal for all of our contracts in the project. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Jack. We suspect that there are some questions that have come in. We're happy to answer those questions. And so Jack, if we have any, please share them and I'll be happy to answer them, as well as JD.
Thanks, Bill. We do have a few that came in, and I invite you to either raise your hand or type some in the chat section if you have any others. Bill, the first one is that someone said, I have the workflow license for FileBound. Will the processes that you just demonstrated work with my license?
Excuse me. Yes, it will, because you have workflow. However, you do need to have the enterprise version of FileBound in order to create the workflow, leverage the e-sign stencil, and then send it out to your e-signature software to get that, that level of integration. And so, yes, we do use workflow, but you have to have the enterprise version in order to build the full integration with auto signatures.
Okay, thanks. And here's another one, Bill, kind of a follow-up, but does this solution work with any product other than DocuSign?
Yes, we show today DocuSign because that's the first that we've had as far as our integrations, and it's been around with FileBound for a long time. But there is another product as well called HelloSign, and those are the two products that right now FileBound, the integration and workflow e-sign module works with. So it works with DocuSign and with HelloSign. And so the only thing that you'd have to do in terms of being able to work with that is you have to have, as a company, your own account and relationship with either DocuSign or with HelloSign. And then once that's established, then the stencil and the e-signature component that we showed you today can be configured to reach out to that account and then build that integration back and forth as we demonstrated today.
JD, here's a workflow design question. It says, I have multiple types of contracts within my company. Do I need to create a new workflow for each of those?
Yeah, so the answer is kind of yes and no on that one. So it depends on the solution. We have one client right now where we are sending out different types of contracts from the same workflow, but it's partially because those contracts are quite similar. So depending on how drastically different these contracts are, and if they're stored in different projects and what your index fields are, you may send them out through different workflows, but you may also use the same one.
Okay. And then, Bill, here's another one. Do the people signing the document need to be FileBound users?
No, they don't. In fact, that's one of the beauties of this integration with DocuSign or potentially HelloSign, is that it's designed to be able to facilitate this communication port along with the signatures of the documents being sent back in to individuals who aren't part of your organization, may not be even employees in your company. In most cases, they're not. It's either customers or vendors or outside people. And so this integration facilitates that communication through the stencil to send out the contract for signature, and then the return of that contract back into FileBound all through the API integration. So the people who are on the outside world signing those documents don't have to be associated with FileBound or even associated with your organization at all. So there's a real flexibility there that makes it quite powerful.
Bill, I'll throw this one at you as well. It says, can a document be signed by more than one person in the approval process?
Yes, it can. Within DocuSign, you have the ability within DocuSign to identify the path through the template that JD showed you of where the document will go. It'll be signed, and then when the final signature is completed and that particular component of the workflow or that path of the workflow has been completed, then the integration will return that document back to us. And as you saw in our workflow, we replaced the original unsigned document template with the signed document itself.
JD, here's one for you. If my contract contact, hard for me to say, changes, how do I update that in FileBound?
Yeah, so the that contact information, that email address or phone number, any of that is all stored just as an index field in FileBound. So changing that is pretty simple. You just open up that contract in FileBound and make that change, and then save that change to the index field like you would for any other project in FileBound.
Perfect, thank you. Well, we're at the bottom of the hour, and I think we covered all the questions that came in. Thank you for submitting those. If you have any further questions, feel free to give us a call. I want to remind you that we do have our final webinar coming up. That'll be held on December 16th, and that's going to be on FileBound Connect. You'll be getting an invite coming in via email on that. We invite you to join us for that. Other than that, have a great day. We appreciate you participating today, and we look forward to talking to you in the future. Bye-bye.